What do all successful people have in common? Their ability to communicate well. One powerful way to both succeed at what you want and improve your communication skills at the same time is by using NLP Meta Programs. What you're about to watch is a lecture I gave on Meta Programs to my coaching group. Below this video, you'll find a free PDF for further guidance on using Meta Programs. Make sure you get your copy and enjoy the lecture. The more you can understand how you function and operate, the more choice you're going to have about how you function and operate. And that's a major part of NLP is just becoming aware of our unconscious programs, bringing them into consciousness so that we can have choice about them rather than just being, blindly following along with our unconscious programs because we don't know any better. And then we're not getting what we want out of life, or we're not getting the kind of fulfillment that we want, and we don't know why. And we just kind of, adhere to these beliefs. Well, what NLP is, we bring those systems, those processes, those functions, those patterns out into the open. We understand them, and then we say, okay, is this absolutely the best thing for me? Or should I choose something else? Should I do something else? So it's about that choice. Now, inevitably, the better you understand yourself, the more you use NLP on yourself, the better you're going to be able to recognize this in other people. And then you do want to turn your attention to how do other people function and how much can I pick up on that just by having a conversation with them, just by asking questions. And I like to do it covertly because you get the most honest answers. When someone knows what you're doing, like it becomes actually more challenging. I don't know if you guys saw the video that I posted yesterday where I was working with a client, and he was very intelligent, and he kind of knew the game of coaching and how certain people, or the advice he was typically given. And when I understood this, I had to sort of fly below radar and make sure he didn't understand where I was going with it before it was too late. And then he had the integration. So when people know what you're doing, a lot of times it will change their answers. So if you're sitting someone down, you say, hey, I'm going to do this meta program thing, and I'm going to ask you questions because I want to understand where you put your attention, how you do what you do and why you do it. They're probably going to have different answers than if you were able to ask these questions without them realizing what you were asking them. And they'll give you more honest answers because they don't realize that you're trying to understand them better. Now, people get a little insecure. They think, okay, especially if they know you're an NLP person, and they can become very resistant and be like, okay, I don't want to give away what's going on in my head because then you might use it against me. And NLP has that reputation, unfortunately. But as I've taught, anytime I taught something that could be used to manipulate people or anything like that, I always say the same thing. How you treat other people is how you treat yourself. If you use this to manipulate people and then and have them act in ways that go against their better interests to serve your own interests, this will come back at you. I've seen it happen. Um, there is a karmic effect that I don't believe in, like the kind of spiritual karma, but there is a sort of karmic effect, and that is based on how you treat others, and your unconscious sees you as a person just like the other people you're mistreating, and it'll turn that on yourself, and it'll create a lot of dysfunction. And likewise, in the opposite direction, the better you treat people, the tendency will be to the better you treat yourself, and the better you treat yourself, the better you treat other people. So just keep that in mind. We don't want to do things that are so deceptive that they hurt people in any way. And so it takes a greater responsibility and a greater level of consciousness, bringing it to what it is that you're doing, so that because I've been careless early on in my career, or early on in learning NLP. I've been careless a few times and ended up doing things that I don't want to say really harmed people, but it got weird. And so when I learned that, I was like, okay, now I understand, and I'll bring a greater level of consciousness next time I'm doing this. So as you gain understanding and you get better and better at this, just know that it comes with greater and greater responsibility. All right. When it comes to meta programs, and what I also see as probably a flaw in a lot of personality profiling type systems, is they don't contextualize things. The problem with not contextualizing things is we are far more sophisticated and complicated beings to say we're all one way or the other in life in general. Okay. There are some people like that, or there might be some of those extremes. But because they are extremes, they're usually not very good. They're usually not good for us. So you might find out when you're playing with a meta program that you tend to be that way in pretty much every area of your life, every context in your life. That bears some examining. Is that good for you? Because most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's good to have a balance that in one context you have you're on one end of the spectrum of a meta program, and in another context you're on the other end of the spectrum. It just makes sense that certain things are going to be useful in certain places, and certain areas it's not going to be useful. The other thing I'd like to mention too is just be careful of any extremes in these meta programs. If you find yourself way to one direction or the other, there's usually some instability and imbalance there. But I'm not saying that is 100% certain. It's more about you looking at this and examining it, seeing how does this play out for you. And I'll give you a little exercise that you can try on top of that. We're going to do like 2 exercises really, if we have time to do the second one. If not, I'll explain the second one. You can do it on your own. And it's really about understanding what are the pros and cons of each end of the spectrum on meta programs. So go ahead and click that link, get access to the PDF, and we're going to go over it. We'll go over it once. Then I'm going to have you choose a context in your life that you would like to explore, and then we'll go through it. And then if we have time, we'll do the second exercise. Okay, so everybody has the PDF, right? This is probably one you're already familiar with, even if you have no NLP training, and it's the toward or away from. If you've done any personal development at all, you'll hear this, that you need to focus on what it is you want. And what we find is that most people tend to focus on what they don't want more than what they do want. Now, I have been challenged on this because Andrew Huberman, who I think is I like his work. I think he's, if you're not familiar with him, he's a neuroscientist. He's got a podcast, and he does he posts a lot on YouTube. And I do encourage anybody who's studying NLP to keep up with neuroscientists, because you'll find that so much of what they say aligns with what we do. And neuroscience as a science existed when NLP was created, but it was a very young science at the time. And so you could say that NLP was sort of like figuring out a lot of the things that neuroscience had yet to prove. A good example would be mirroring and matching. When NLP was created, they hadn't discovered mirror neurons. They just knew that when you match and mirror someone, you tend to feel in rapport with them. And it wasn't until the 90s that there was, by accident in Italy, they discovered they had a monkey had electrodes hooked up to his brain and everything. And somebody had come in off of a break and had a gelato and was eating the gelato, and the monkey's brain waves started flaring up as if the monkey was eating the gelato. And it was like, that's interesting, because the monkey's not eating the gelato, it's in a cage or wherever it was. And then they started looking into that. Well, what's happening there? If the monkey, the nerves are firing off as if the monkey is eating this thing, when clearly he is not. He's just watching it. And that's how they discovered mirror neurons. So scientific proof came later. And what you'll find is NLP has discovered a lot of these things just in practice, and then neuroscience can come and not necessarily prove all the time. Sometimes it's just about shedding light on what's actually happening. So toward and away from, what we find is that your unconscious, Andrew Huberman, what we find is that our unconscious functions more from the representations, our internal representations. So if you're more focused on what you don't want, this is the reason why I brought up Andrew Huberman. There have been some scientific studies that have shown that people are more motivated by what they fear happening. They're more motivated by what they don't want. And I understand that, and I would say that, and that's an away from strategy, right? I'm going to take action. I'm going to start exercising because I just had a heart attack, or I'm on the verge of having a heart attack and I need to get healthy, right? Most people wait until things have gotten too bad to finally take action. And there's nothing like the fear of death to make you get off your butt and do something different. And this is how most people are functioning from. Now, Is that a good thing, or is that a bad thing? Is it better to then train your mind to focus on the incentive and going after what you want? Yes, I think it absolutely is. Now, the studies say one thing, okay? The studies say that this is just how most people are motivated, but that doesn't mean that that's the best way to do things. So we function from the representations we make in our mind. So when we negate something and we say, I don't want that, you still have to create that representation in your mind, and your unconscious doesn't know the difference if you want that or not. It's your conscious mind that has to come in and say, no, we don't want this. But that is a process, and that's a reaction. And so when people are living mostly by focusing on what they don't want and are motivated by that, they are much more reactionary. They're kind of a step behind. They get too close to the fire and then they jump back, but they've already gotten burned a little bit. Whereas if you shift your attention to focusing on what it is you do want, you tend to be ahead of the game. You tend to be that person who performs better than the average person who outperforms the people around them. So while I'm not going to disagree with Andrew Huberman, who's a scientist, that most people are in fact more motivated by what they fear happening, what they're trying to avoid. I don't disagree with that. What I'm saying is that I think it's better to retrain your mind to focus on what it is that you don't want. I mean, that you do want. It's good to know what you don't want. I just don't think it's a good place to motivate yourself, because then you're always reacting. Then you're always you're mired in fear when you do that. And it was a great, or it still is a great music producer by the name of, I think it was Larry Iovine. And he said that fear, he's a one of the most successful music producers ever. And he said that fear makes a great tailwind, not a good headwind. And that's a great way to sort of bring a metaphor to the toward or away from. If fear is in front of you and you're trying to outrun it, you're running scared all the time. If fear is behind you, but you're more focused on what you do want, then yeah, you got to, there's a little reminder there to saying, you better do this or else. But your focus is, hey, that's the thing that I want, and I'm getting closer and closer to it, which gets more and more motivating. All right, so that's the toward and away from frame. Process versus options. So this is really interesting to watch this play out in a workplace. The process side of it is that that's the person who needs the manual, right? That's the person who says, tell me exactly step by step what I need to do. When they're told, we need this particular outcome, or here's the goal that we want. The options person is the person who wants to explore many options and try different things, and they better function from a place of sort of freedom and autonomy, typically. So process and options is basically, the process is, I want the step by step, I want the manual, and the options is, I want to explore and sort of figure this out as we go, which probably works better for more creative and artistic endeavors. Whereas the process side of it, it's probably better for things like surgery and a pilot on an airplane, flying a plane and having to troubleshoot something would probably be better to be more process oriented. The way I like to explain this is, I tend to be process in the beginning when I don't know something, and I tend to be options later when I feel like I have the process down. And I think a lot of people function that way. When it comes to putting together IKEA furniture, I'm all process. Give me the manual. I want to see step by step, because, and I know people, and people, and you might be this person. You don't want to look at the manual. You just like, give me the pieces of furniture. I'm going to figure it out as I go. That would be an options based. Okay. Now I've tried that. And the reason why I don't do that anymore is because there were so many times I had to take furniture apart and put it back together again, because I put the wrong part. I mean, I had the idea. I could understand how it was supposed to come together. And so I thought I was being clever by not having to read the manual. But then you start putting it together and you realize, okay, you're 2/3 done. Now you have to take it all apart because you missed this one piece that has to go in before the other. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to spend more time on furniture than I have to. I want to put my attention somewhere else. So that would be a good way to sort of explain the difference between process and options. Now, I can kind of hear your minds already. Oh, is it Jimmy Iovine? Yeah. I can kind of hear your minds going already. You're starting to think, well, what kind of person am I? And I think to be fair to yourself, it's okay to think that. It's okay to be wondering about that. But it's really going to be about who you are in different contexts in your life, because almost certainly you're going to have a different approach depending on the context in your life or whether or not your process are options. So like if you're um, in IT for a career, but you're also a musician, you're probably going to be more process when you're at your career. You're probably going to be more options when you're making your music, just to give you an example. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is don't try to pin yourself down. And this is another thing when it comes to using NLP with other people. People are wanting to kind of pin other people down, especially when they learn about modalities. When we start realizing that we tend to lean on one particular representational system, like visual or auditory, and we tend to have a bias and a preference in that area. And when people start learning this, when they first start learning NLP, when they meet people, they're always trying to like pin them down. Is this an auditory person? Is this a visual person? And the truth is that we tend to be very sophisticated, and we tend to lean on one or the other, depending more so depending on the situation. And only really rarely do you meet a person who's an extreme, like who's extremely auditory or who's extremely visual and nothing else, or extremely kinesthetic and nothing else. We tend to be much more blended in general. So one way to break rapport with someone very quickly is to try to pin them down, to try to like judge them so quickly as to what they are. And I remember doing that when I first started learning NLP, and I was like, why are people like repelled by me? Because I'm just trying to, figure out what their representational system is or what their meta program is. And it's like, don't do that. Just gather the information. And as you're gathering the information, it'll start to become more and more clear to you what they tend to lean on. But you also need to give them the space and the freedom that in a completely different context, they might act completely differently, or they might not adhere to the same patterns. So always keep that in mind, and be kind to yourself by allowing yourself that same space. So internal and external, and this is basically where do you tend to do your processing. Now, of course, we can't escape the fact that all of our processing has to happen internally, but it's more about your perception of the process. So we say here, where do you turn to when you're learning something or working toward a goal, internally or externally? Internal people like to think alone and reflect on their experiences to find solutions, whereas external people like to ask for advice and experiment and gather feedback. Now, there's nothing wrong with either one. And in fact, I would say that a more balanced way to go about this is to have some sort of combination of both. Uh, but in some areas of your life, you might have a kind of a system and how you do things, and it might be more internal or it might be more external. And if that's working for you, you can explore this a little bit, but you just might find that there is just one way that works better for you. If you've tried and tested it and it does, then why mess up something that's working well? All right, everybody got this so far? This is not hard stuff, so it's pretty simple. Some of NLP, some of the great things about NLP is that it's so simple, and we do that. We know that we do this just mostly unconsciously. That it's easy to tap into this. I hear this people say this all the time when I'm teaching them NLP or they're learning NLP, and they're like, "Wow, this is I know I already do this." And it was like, yeah, this is not. We're not like creating something new. We're just mapping how we do what we do. But most of it is very unconscious. So when the more conscious we can become of it, the more we can actually leverage it and use it, like say association and disassociation. People are like, well, I already know that. And it's like NLP is not trying to say you didn't know this before. What we're doing with NLP is we're understanding how we're doing it, becoming more aware of when we're doing it, and then asking ourselves, does this work better when if I continue doing it the same way that I've been doing it, or can I make a better choice about it? Like, is it better? I tend to disassociate at a certain time when things are critical, but might it be better if I stay associated? Well, I'll give that a try. So that's what NLP is really about. It's about giving you the option to understand what's happening, mostly unconsciously, so that you can then make it conscious and make better choices. All right, match and mismatcher. Okay. This can be a lot of fun to play with. Um, your mismatchers are going to seem like the people who are really disagreeable. I think what's good that can come out of learning this as a meta program is we can maybe, when we're dealing with someone who's a mismatcher, understand that better about them, that this is the way that they process things, rather than quickly judging them as just a jerk, right? Sometimes being a mismatcher in a given situation can be very, very useful. In negotiating, being a mismatcher can be very useful because you're sort of teasing out what might be missing or what might not be working. Sometimes I've mismatched people so that they go the opposite direction of what they think I want, but that ends up going in the direction that I want because I could see it ahead of time. And so reverse psychology would is another way of saying that. The funniest thing that I've done with mismatching is whenever I used to have a NLP practice group here in Santa Cruz. It was not on Zoom. It was before Zoom was popular, and people would actually show up. And it got to the point where I became less of a participant and more of a teacher. And this is actually what kind of launched my business as an NLP teacher and a coach. And so I'd sit people down, and I wouldn't tell each person everything. I would just tell one person, hey, match this person. They're not going to know what you're doing, but use their predicates, use their body posture, match and mirror, and just do that for a while, and notice if you're gaining rapport with them or not. And sure enough, like they would see it, and then I would take them aside. And I would say, okay, well, what did you experience? And they're like, wow, I feel really connected to the person. And then I would talk to the other person. They would probably say something similar. And then I would tell that person who was doing all the matching, I was like, then I would say, now mismatch the person and see how they respond. The funniest thing happens is that almost nobody who had started matching the other person could then mismatch. And the reason they couldn't do it is because they were so in rapport with that person that they felt like they were being too disagreeable and that the person would hate them. And then people just don't like breaking rapport. Once they're in rapport with you, they will follow you around rather than break rapport because it feels good to be in rapport. It makes you feel trusting and familiar with that person. And I would tell people, I was like, now mismatch. And then I would, when in the process they couldn't seem to do it, they kept matching. And then I would like tap them on the foot or something. And I would say, okay, come on, mismatch. I wouldn't say that out loud because it would give it away. But finally, the person would turn to me and just go, I can't do it. And so I'd say, well, watch me. And then I would start mismatching the person. And you would just see the look on their face. They would go, because like I would take what they're saying and I would make it sound like I was basically what's the best word I could say? Just giving my interpretation of what they were saying, but I was getting it so wrong, and I was using the opposite uh, predicates, sensory-based predicates, and the person would just start backing them. They were like, "No, you're totally not getting this," and then they would try to explain themselves again, and then I would get it totally wrong again, and then before they would hit like a real frustration, I would stop and say, "Okay, this is what we were doing." So mismatching can be useful, especially if you don't want to interact with someone anymore. You can mismatch in ways that isn't overtly rude, but it makes the person want to get away from you. And it's just by exactly what I was saying. You can do it on a very covert level by mismatching their posture. If they're sitting down, you can stand up, and then that kind of tells the person that you want to go, you want to leave, and that breaks rapport. Or you can just use mismatching their predicates, or you could just mismatch by misinterpreting everything that they're saying, and the person's going to be like, "Ah, this person just doesn't get me," and they're going to want to get away from you. And that sometimes can be useful. So let's read what we have here in the PDF. Do you look for what is similar in a situation or what is different? Matchers are great at creating rapport with new people because they go to what is familiar and find a common connection. The downside of this is becoming so agreeable to people that they might compromise, you might end up compromising your own values. Mismatchers are great at detecting differences and make good detectives because they can often immediately see what's not right. This is great for correcting problems before they start. However, the downside of this can be that mismatchers can come off as disagreeable and playing devil's advocate so much that they drive others away. Now, Steve Andreas, as you know, my mentor, mismatched a lot, but he didn't do it on purpose to put people off. But he was very good at his mind would go straight to the differences, the discrepancies in something. If he saw you doing something incorrectly, his mind was laser sharp, it was like a laser to those things, and he would point them out. And a lot of people took that to be that he was attacking them, and he absolutely wasn't. He was never mean about it. He was never, he never called them names or anything like that. But people would take it that way. So you can mismatch with people because you're really good at picking out the discrepancies and differences, and you have to be careful about how you communicate that if you don't want to break rapport with the person. All right, the next one is past, present, and future. This is pretty self-explanatory. Where does your mind tend to reside? And again, this is always going to be contextual, right? And when I would think about my career for most of my life, I lived in the future. My head was in the future, which made it very difficult to make things happen in the present because it really takes what you do in the present to make the things that you want in the future to happen. So I spent a lot of time stuck in hope. And I did last week, I did a video about hope, which can really get in your way to creating what you want because you become very dependent on some sort of outside force that you imagine in your mind called hope, but you're not actually taking responsibility for that change. Uh, in general, it's good to be present oriented in life. It's good to have good access to the past. It's also good to see your future, have a sense of where you want to go. But in very specific contexts, you might find that, past history and something is more important. Or being present might not be as important, or being very future focused can be can be better for you in a given context. But in life in general, we want to be pretty present. So this is basically, where do you put your attention when you have a goal or you're learning something new? Do you like your past and work from experience? This can be very helpful, but it can be limiting if you only stick with past results to move forward. Do you like to be more spontaneous and present, believing that the best solutions are in the present? This can be a great approach, except you might end up repeating past mistakes if you're too present and you don't acknowledge past experience. Does your attention go to the future, to a vision of how things might be like? It's great to have a clear vision of where you want to go. However, the downside to having your attention only here is that you don't have the valuable information from the past, and if you've disconnected from the present, it's hard to take action toward this vision. Now, I can give you another sort of example of culturally how this can be, because meta programs can apply to cultures. I grew up in South Louisiana, deep South, and that culture in general uh, sees the past as being brighter than the future. They have a tendency to think that doom and gloom is coming up because it's uncertain, but they celebrate the past so much. They have a tendency to celebrate their elderly and give them um, more, or see them as being more wise and in some way greater than the youth. Now that's what I grew up in, so it's very past focused. And I moved to California, which is very future focused as a culture. And they're often willing to kind of throw away the past and past history and lessons learned in favor of, well, what are the young people doing? What are, and so we kind of take our orders from the youth in this state, and the deep South, or in Louisiana in general, it's more the opposite. And I would say, and I'm not an expert in Northern European cultures, but my experience of having been to Norway and to Sweden, I feel like those are very present cultures. They tend to be very much like here and now. Not that they can't access the past or the future. They are somewhat future oriented as well, but they tend to seem to really enjoy life now and in the present. And I found that as a culture, they tend to be that way. I could be wrong about that because I haven't spent a ton of time with that culture, but that was my impression. Okay, thoughts and feelings. So do you take an intellectual, more cerebral approach, or do you take more of an emotional, feelings-based approach? So the thought space is going to be more your intellectuals, and your feelings based might be more your creative types and your artists, but not necessarily. What's interesting to look at, or apply this one to, is the politics in this country. I talk to people who they say they're on this side of the spectrum, the political spectrum, or that side of the political spectrum. I'm very thoughts based on this. I want to see the receipts. I want the results. I want to know specifics and policy. But there's so many people who don't function that way, and their opinions uh, aren't based on that. Their opinions are just based on how they feel about a politician or how they feel about a political party. And when you start asking them questions about it, they usually get really frustrated if you're asking specific questions about details and policies, because their opinion wasn't based on that. Their opinion was really based on a feeling. And I'm a little cautious of that because I feel like you can feel really good about something, but it could not be what it appears to be in front of you. So I tend to be more thoughts-based in most areas, but not all areas. When you think about when it comes to eating food, are you more thoughts-based or more feelings-based? Do you go more by the taste of the food and how much you enjoy it, or are you focused on calorie content and nutritional content? That would be kind of the difference here. So either or and you might recognize this also from the meta model. There's an either or pattern. So do you tend to think of elements in a situation as being right or wrong, on or off, like a light switch, and it either is or it isn't? And this can be good for being very decisive. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but often situations can be more inclusive, and thinkers tend to think yes and. If you've ever done improv, right? That's what improv is. You take whatever the person just said and you say yes and you build on that. What if you said, well, no, it's not because or but, and that would kind of shut down the improv right there. So this approach is great for team and community building with the and. The downside is less decisiveness and lack of clarity. And also it could just be going along with something that isn't really good or useful, but it's more being agreeable. And so it is good for building rapport, not great for having to accept maybe hard truths, black and white truths about something. Okay, so that's really the meta programs we're going to cover here. Of course, you can look up meta programs. There's like, I think L. Michael Hall wrote a book on meta programs that he might have even coded 100 or so meta programs. Like there's a lot. And then there's Shelley Rose Charvet, who has made a big part of her career on meta programs. I came really close to taking her training. I never got around to it. But anyway, a lot of people like what she's done. She's takes a simplified version of it, of meta programs, and I forget what she called it. It's a certain method. But anyway, if this really interests you, there's lots more to explore. So before we actually start applying this, does anybody have any questions?
Would you, if you were exploring this for yourself, would you, I have the idea of going through it and taking the sort of the bigger context of my life and then visualizing and applying whether or not I'm toward or away from or a mixture of both. How would you start to figure that out? You
Okay.
just map it out in terms of context?
Yeah, so that's what we're about to do. I'm about to walk through that as an exercise with everyone. So I'll explain it as we go. All right. What I'm looking for more is, does anybody have any questions about the meta programs themselves? Because as far as applying them, we're about to do that. So if your question's about applying them, we'll do that now. But does anybody not quite understand one or more of the meta programs and you need more of an explanation? Words that change minds. Yeah, Shelley Rose Charvet. The lab profile. I could always count on Lonnie. She's like an encyclopedia of this stuff. Okay, so it seems like everybody understands them well enough. So go ahead and choose an area of your life to work on. Could be your career, could be your marriage, could be your social life, could be your health, a hobby. So anything that you can kind of draw a circle around in your life that we can get a little more focused, because I don't want to say it's impossible to sort of apply meta programs overall for who you are in your life, but in general, we're kind of a mixed bag. We don't tend to be exactly the same in every context, and that's nothing wrong with that. Actually, I think that's more healthy. And does everybody understand what I mean by context? You're just picking a context in your life, very simple. And I'll choose something fun. I'll choose making YouTube videos. So it's even more specific. It's part of my career. It's a more specific context in my career. And that's what I'll use as I go through this. Okay, so let's start at the top, toward or away from. So you can start very generally, just thinking in general, what do you tend to do? Now, be very careful about thinking of it in terms of what you would like to do or who you would like to be in this situation, because it might not be the honest truth. All right. So, how can we make sure that we're telling ourselves the truth? Well, you can think about a specific experience that happened. And typically, what's going to help you bring your attention in the right place here is to think about maybe a decision you made and maybe a challenging decision that you made in this area, a recent one. So it's fresh. And then think about, okay, what was I focused on? Was I focused on getting what I wanted, moving toward what I wanted? Or was I more focused on moving away from what I didn't want, moving away from what I was trying to avoid? And if you want to put your answers in the chat box, feel free to do that. And it might not be all, all one or the other. You might be right down the middle and very balanced. Again, try to be as honest as you can with yourself. And don't change anything, just explore it. When you introduce the idea of trying to change this, then you want to take one step at a time. Find out who you are first, or how you do things first, before you change anything. Mainly towards, okay, good. Resistance. Resistance is usually linked to away from. Notice that I move toward what I love about something and only do things I don't want to do when I am moving away from consequences I don't want, mainly toward. Okay, good to know. Yeah, and so here's the thing too. You can think of it as a spectrum, a number from, or you can go, depending on how your mind works, you can think of 0 as being right in the middle, and 1 through 5 going in the toward direction, 5 being like totally focused on what you want toward and nothing else. And you can think of like the negative, -1, -2, -3 going in the direction of I focus on what I don't want to motivate me. Away from first and strongly then towards. Yeah. So you can kind of give yourself a number, or if just 1 to 10 works better for you, whatever's easiest for you. You can kind of give yourself a little ranking of where you find yourself on that spectrum. Away then toward. Oh, okay. So what Lonnie's talking about here is kind of, now we're getting into a little bit of NLP strategy here. She does one thing and then the other. That's what we call a strategy. What are the steps that you follow, the processing steps to follow before you make a decision? Okay. Yeah, I would probably, when it comes to making YouTube videos, I'm probably at about an 8 on the toward, with every once in a while a little annoying thing in the background saying, you remember how you screwed this up, or remember that video that was a total flop. You don't want to do that again. In the same context, sometimes towards and sometimes away. Okay. Kareem, what you could do is explore that even more and find out, well, what was the difference that made the difference in those situations? And the wonderful thing about this is you just start to learn a lot about yourself and how you make decisions. And again, the more you learn about that, the better decisions you're going to make. So what really made the difference, between those situations? Because it's all in the same context. And this just goes to show too, we are complex, sophisticated beings. We like to think that we're very logical and that we do things one way or the other. And it's just not so. We just have different ways of functioning and operating. And that's why things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like, it's just too rigid. We don't follow one strict hierarchy. Each context will dictate a different hierarchy. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Process versus options. So do you tend to follow a specific process? Do you tend to follow the steps, the manual? Yeah, people who are very principled in a certain area, you're going to be more of the process. The options, you're going to be one of those people who is a little okay, who's okay with some uncertainty and doesn't mind exploring and trying out new things and experimenting. Interesting. Okay. With YouTube, for me, I have to be really a balance of both, because There are very specific things, very specific processes. If you don't follow them, it's not going to work. At the same time, you want to kind of try to be ahead of things and show people what they don't know that they want. And that requires me to function in options. Wow, Tammy's in options in a 10? What context is that? Is that art or creativity? Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. However, there are some artists that are very processed and based. You think about like I found this weird when I first heard about it, but it's a real thing, and maybe some of you here are like that. Those very mathematical types, even mathematicians, who create music, and their music is pretty good. Like it's not you would think somebody who's not focused on art and creativity, but focused on process wouldn't be that good. No, in fact, there are plenty of people who create art in a very processed way, and it turns out very good. Hollywood movies, though they look, creative, a lot of them are purely based in process. There's a very strict, formulaic way that they tell stories. The freedom or the options comes in with like how the actor might interpret a role or whatever, but the storyline is very formulaic, very process. Can you give an example in the context of relationship? Ooh, yeah. So when I was in college and I was dating, I cultivated some rules for myself with dating. Things like, so when I was in when I was in college, there was uh, some girls who really would say yes to a date because they just wanted the guy to buy them dinner. And so, being in college, you're not making a lot of money. And so I made a rule for myself that I don't do that on a first date. I only would go for coffee. And then later I got married, later got divorced, later got back into the dating scene again. And I broke out my rules, my rules that I had solidified in college. Well, it turns out when you're 38 and you're in different times, a lot of those rules don't necessarily apply. So I had to get out of that and go more options based and find a better way to go about dating. And so, but eventually I went back to process. And even as some of you know, I created a dating kind of a dating program. It's not a dating program. It's about overcoming anxiety to approach the people who you want to approach. And so that is a very systematic process based way. So I would often when a relation, so that would be an example of how I can give it with relationships. You'll find that when you've been with someone for quite a while, that you do sort of have a process of how the two of you function around things. You have certain rules, certain agreements. Some of them are unconscious, and some of them are very conscious. In Steve's books, I forget which volume it is, but it's one of the elephant books, Six Blind Elephants. He talks about unconscious agreements, and what happens is because they're never spoken out loud, that it's quite possible that one person does something in the relationship and the other feels betrayed, even though there was never a spoken agreement about it. And the other person who did the betraying doesn't realize that they did any betraying because there was never an agreement spoken out loud. So they didn't even know that they were violating some sort of unconscious agreement because it was only with the other person. So there is a lot of processing going on, and especially long-term relationships. But the great thing about understanding all of this is one of the things that also helps with long-term relationships is novelty. If we're just doing the same thing all the time, things get kind of stale. You kind of don't think of your partner as this special person you're sharing your life with, and they feel more like a roommate, right? If you only stick to the process. So if you go into options and you start getting creative and you start doing things together and creating more novelty in the relationship, it'll make it more interesting. You'll get to know each other in a new way. There was somebody, was it Jason Silva? He's a popular content creator. I think his name's Jason Silva. And he was talking about how the patterns in our lives, the routines in our lives, they become unconscious so that we kind of don't see them anymore. It's kind of like a fish in water. It doesn't know it's in water. And that happens in our lives, that happens in our relationships. And that's usually when things get very stale and static. And this is one of the reasons why I like traveling so much, because it pops you out of that. You don't have, you're in a different country where you don't speak the language, and you got, and it's a culture that's foreign to you. You don't have those sort of patterns and processes to feel your way around. Now you have to sort of take in real life in front of you all over again. And so it shifts you into options. But a lot of people don't like that. I talk to people all the time. They say, I'd love to travel as much as you do. And I go, you sure about that? And I start showing them how easy it actually is to travel. And then they back away from me and go, no, you know what? I don't want to travel. And it's like, okay. A lot of people who think they want to travel don't, because it does take getting unfamiliar, and it takes you out of process, your daily habits and routines, and puts you into options. Now you have to figure stuff out because everything's not the same way that you're used to. Process for business application, options around the creativity, content behind the business. Very nice. Yeah. All right. Let's go internal, external. So where do you turn to when you're learning something or working toward a goal? Are you more internal, or are you more external? Do you go to yourself to sort of figure out what are your next steps? Or do you start asking for input from other people in this particular area? Would Yeah, external would include researching. And you can also ask yourself, is this is it working for you? Does it seem to be good? It's not necessarily equal to introvert, but you're going to find that most of your introverts are going to do this. But it's not always a set thing. I'm an introvert, but I often I'll know that I can't. They say you can't see the contents. You can't read the label from inside the jar, right? I'm very well aware of that. I'm very well aware that I have blind spots if I'm only trying to focus on finding answers from within myself. Internal to external, back to internal. Yeah. So Caleb, again, what's good about this is you're understanding your strategy. So it's not you're taking the meta program and you're realizing that there's a step-by-step process. So this is what we call a strategy. In YouTube, it was interesting when I first started. I didn't look externally at all. I just thought I'm going to just do a video every single day and see what happens. And 30 days later, 30 videos later, I had maybe 2 additional subscribers. And I maybe got 1 or 2 views on my videos. And that's when I realized I needed to look externally. And I found a training program, and I took that program and I learned a lot. And I started implementing that. I started getting views, I started getting subscribers. And then I went probably another 2 years before I looked externally again, because I wanted to take another level up. So I have a tendency to go back and forth with YouTube, but I've also found that I've started to fixate at times. This is where things have gone wrong for me, that there is some answer out there that somebody can just give me, and then it's going to make things more successful. I had to get clear about that within myself, because it's just not. There are some answers, but what I've also discovered just recently is that you really have to find your own voice, and it's partly carving out your own way, and it is partly following certain guidelines and principles, which would be the external, but it's also partly carving out your own way, which would be internal. Or external research was inconclusive. It moved to internal, where values lie. Yeah, I think a lot of times we tend to kind of go back and forth until we find the answer we want, huh? But in a certain area, a certain context, you might find that you've sort of rested on something that you find works best for you, which is more internal or possibly more external. Match or mismatcher? Man, when I was a teenager up into my early 20s, I was such a mismatcher. I think the reason for that was I liked attention. And so if I disagreed with someone or found a way to point out something that didn't quite fit, uh, I kind of liked that attention. But of course, it didn't win me many friends or influence over people. So what do you tend to do in this situation? Now, if you're a real problem solver, or you're the type, let's say you work in a business and you're known for being that dark horse that they call in when somebody thinks, or when maybe there's people are working on a project and they think they have it all figured out. They bring in that mismatcher to come in and bust it up in case there's weaknesses. That mismatcher can come in and really point out the weaknesses. Now, nobody likes the mismatcher in that in a situation like that, but they're very useful if they can point out things that are not obvious and to the matchers that can solve problems before they happen. That's a very useful skill. They just tend not to be liked that much. And with me and YouTube, still haven't figured this one out because you have to match enough that people can recognize when they see your thumbnail or your title that this is a video that they want, but you need to be a mismatcher enough to not just keep saying all the same stuff that everyone else is saying. So this is one that I go back and forth on. Match when I start meaning, but sometime micromanage the final product and get into mismatching. Yeah, that I could definitely see that happening. It's like things are going well, you're enjoying the process of a project, and then at the end of it, then that's the time to get really critical of it and start mismatching and saying, okay, can it be made better? If so, how? And the only way you can really do that is by looking at its weaknesses or what might not be going so well. Mismatch in areas feel unsure, match where feel comfortable. I've been a mismatcher for many years. From childhood, have had to develop match. Still primarily mismatch, consciously have to match. Yeah, when I was a teenager, that was definitely a thing. Just naturally mismatch people. When mismatching is to find out and make it better. Good. Mostly matching a bit too agreeable sometimes, mostly a strength. Yeah, you can definitely be too agreeable. There's those people who just they don't want to rock the boat, so it's just easier for them in their minds to constantly match and agree. But then they might end up agreeing to do something that they really don't want to do. There's a big mismatcher in business because I like to foresee potential problems and come up with early solutions. But yes, it's gotten me in trouble. Those who don't recognize that asset, I'm much more of a matcher. Yeah, and then you can be a little more creative and maybe artistic about it, and think to yourself like, okay, I want to mismatch, but how do I deliver it in a package that looks like matching? And I feel like that's kind of the trick that I'm doing with YouTube right now. Is just how do I make what I'm giving look familiar enough so that people want to see it, but at the same time, I'm telling them something that's different and maybe even contradictory, to not only because it's true, but also to carve out my presence as separate from other teachers. Okay, then we have the past, the present, and the future. So, what is your time orientation in this context? Where you tend to, where does your attention tend to reside? In past experience and the history of, to help you inform where do you go now and what are your decisions that you make? Are you more present and spontaneous and willing to just kind of drop everything and try something completely different? Or are you more oriented into the future? Where is this going to bring you? Where do you end up? What is your decisions right now going to, where are they going to take you? Yeah. So with me, with YouTube being in the past would be what has worked in the past and sticking with that. And I was doing that for years, but the algorithm changed, so that doesn't work anymore. And so I've had to sort of let that go and be a little more present and future oriented. Yeah, you got to be careful of going too much into the future. It can definitely cause anxiety. And that's a lot of what anxiety is created out of, is being too, your head is in the future. You cannot be anxious, like overly anxious. You can be somewhat anxious, but you can't be really overly anxious and be present. It doesn't work. You have to be very anxious. You have to be focused in the future. And this is why a lot of people stay in the past, because the past is safe And when I was talking about my culture that I grew up in, that's what it felt like to me. It was easy to romanticize the past because it was safe. It had already happened. It was not threatening anymore. The present and the future can feel to a lot of people to be more threatening because anything can happen in the moment and bad stuff can happen in the future. So if you're focused on the future and of the negative, it can definitely cause you a lot of anxiety. Past, present, too much, and recognize I need more future. Okay. Future and present. I'm going along in this journey with career. I've become a lot more present and able to focus on future possibilities without future pacing disasters. Recent shift. Very good. In relation to learning, I'm mainly present and sometimes in the future. Okay, good. Yeah, especially for performances. If there's anything that you do that you could say is a performance, something you have to be, really present in the moment, then obviously you can be very present. But a lot of people who have such performances, their head is in the future, and that screws them up a lot, or their head's in the past, and that would screw them up a lot. You have to be very present during a performance. Does time orientation correlate at all with tempo tendencies? Past people slower, future people faster? I don't think so. I'm not quite clear for tempo. Yeah, I don't know. um, I don't think there's a tempo attached to it, but that could be something you explore and find out. See if you can make some observations around that. But I don't think so. I get where you're going with that, but I don't think that's necessarily attached to that. I'm too optimistic future often. Yeah, very optimistic people tend to be focused in the future, but what can happen is they're not dealing with things in the present that need to be dealt with in the present. They'd rather just shift their attention to the future when everything's better. But not everybody feels the same way. Sometimes people think everything in the future is going to get worse. All right, thoughts and feelings. How do you approach what you do? More so in a more intellectual, more cerebral way, or more feelings and emotions based? I think it says feelings. Seven feelings. Oh, you're a seven. Okay. All right. All feelings and emotions. Interesting. Oh, we got a lot of feelings people here. Yeah, it's been fascinating for me in doing more research into YouTube and what's working and what's not working. Overwhelmingly, I'm finding that the videos that seem to get the most views are more feelings based. They look procedural. They look as though they're teaching somebody something, a step-by-step process, but in actuality, they're really just confirming the feelings and beliefs that the person already has. So because they're not really saying anything new and they're not really teaching anything new. And so I'm like, why would people keep watching the same stuff over and over again? And it's really feelings based. People like to have their beliefs confirmed. And there's actually, so your tutorials would be more your thoughts based, what teaching something step by step specifically. And there's just not as much. Doesn't seem those don't seem to be as popular, but that's okay too, because you know you don't need everyone to watch your videos or like your videos, or you can apply this to anything. You might have a very specific audience you're looking for. So in relationship, often feelings first and the thoughts come after. Yeah, I would have to say, if you didn't have kind of a balance here in relationships of thoughts and feelings, you could run into a lot of trouble. So I'm really a combination when it comes to YouTube with this. I have to feel good about what I'm doing, and I also want it to work. So I'm strategic about it. So it's really a balance for me when it comes to YouTube, thoughts and feelings. Okay, either or and. Which do you tend to be? Do you tend to think in terms of black and white, or do you tend to think in terms of maybe adding or building upon? And interesting. Yeah, I have to count myself as an and person as well when it comes to YouTube. Not that I never see things in either or black and white, but in general, it's more about adding more to it. Okay, how do you feel? Do you feel like you understand yourself a little bit better, at least in this area of your life? And has it sort of awakened some possible changes that you'd like to make? Yeah. Most people are, no matter how successful or happy or fulfilled they are, can always have more and more optimizations made to these processes. Now, we're already a little bit over, so I'm just going to explain to you an exercise that I created was years and years ago when I first learned about meta programs. And so I created a process called Meta Program Mixing Board. And how I thought about it, I was around, maybe I saw a documentary about music or something like that. And I remember just watching an engineer in a recording studio, just moving the levels, and just really balancing the music as the music was going. And I got to thinking, I was like, well, what if we did something like that with meta programs and take each area of life and really just mix it and balance it that works the best way. And so what I would do in my NLP practice group, where people, actually showed up live and we were in person, which seems so foreign after the pandemic, huh? And I would put 2 markers on either side that gave good enough distance, maybe as wide as my arm span. And then I would put a marker in the middle, and this was all on the floor. And then I would have a person choose the area of life they wanted to explore. And then we would put these meta programs out in front of them. We would label them on the floor, and they would have that range, that spectrum. And so we would start off and I would say, okay, where are you now? Where would you place yourself? And what area of the meta program for this particular context that you want to explore? And the person would point to wherever they were on that particular meta program. And then I would say, okay, go ahead and step into that. So they would step into that. They would imagine as if they're fully associated in not only the context, but in that meta program and thinking from that place. And then I would say, okay, what would it be like if you were on the other end of the spectrum? And I would have them go to the other extreme. And they would step over to it. And the amazing thing is you'd watch their skin tone change. They would sometimes cringe or sometimes they would laugh. Like it was really having a strong effect. So basically they're applying a completely different filter and in this area of their lives. And so it's really important when you're doing this exercise to stay associated. And so they would explore one extreme and then I'd bring them to the other extreme. And then I would bring them back to where they originally were. And so they got all this new information by going back and forth and perceiving this context through different extremes of meta programs. And then I would say, did you learn anything useful? And they would say, yeah, I had no idea. And they would start, they would even say sometimes like, I have a coworker I never understood. Now that I just stepped into this other extreme, now I understand that coworker. I understand how they think now because they think based on this meta program. So not only were they understanding themselves better in the context, they were even understanding other people in that context better who did things differently than them. And so then I would say, do you want to keep it where you are in this, or do you want to change it? And almost every time they wanted at least a small change. They would move to one direction or the other in the meta program, and then we would go there, and then I would say, okay, how does that feel? And they were like, it feels good. Check congruence, right? Is there any resistance to being here? No. Okay, great. Is there any ecological problems in the system, meaning external factors, other people, relationships? Would that cause a problem here? And maybe it does, but it might still be worth keeping. That's always a possibility when it comes to issues of ecology. And so we were working this out step by step, right? So if they had a congruence issue, we would visit it. We always want to bring resistance up, ask what is its positive intention. So we want all the information out on the table for them to make a very good decision. And eventually we would end up with oftentimes a new location on the meta program. Sometimes not. Sometimes they realize, no, this meta program where I'm at in this particular meta program for this context works perfect. This is the way that I want it to be. But most often, once they were able to experience other areas of the meta program, taking in new information, they often made usually a slight change. It was rare for them to make an extreme change, but every once in a while we would have that where they would go, oh no, I can't believe I was, going about this through this filter. I want the other thing. The other thing is much better. And so they would go to the other extreme. And so I would just walk them through, and I wouldn't do more than like 5 meta programs. It gets to be a lot, right? And it's an exhausting exercise by the time you get done with it. So you can do this for yourself. You can put the markers out on the floor. It just makes it easier so you don't have to think about it so much and try to work it all out in your head. You're actually physically moving and you're going from one end of the spectrum to the other. And so you start off exploring, you try changing some things up, you go back to where you were before. You might even need to step off of it completely to disassociate and, make sure you're kind of stepping back and saying, okay, how, is this a change that I really want to make? So, you're giving yourself that space and that freedom to explore it. And then you step back in, you go, yeah, this is right. I want to change it over here. Or maybe you don't. And what's good about, even if you don't want to change anything, then you understand at least why it is that way and why you function that way, which will feel better about what you do and the decisions that you make. Let's see. Sounds like a fun YouTube video to watch someone with these meta programs. Yeah. Would you do this one person at a time? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Yeah, I wouldn't walk a group through this. It has to be a little more involved. I've had some trouble with Zoom today. Is this tape going to be available for us to watch? Yeah, I forget where. We usually do make it available. I'm not sure where, but we will. So anyway, that's the program. That's the exercise that or the process that I would use with people called the Meta Program mixing board. So you're exploring all extremes or all ends of each meta program in a given context. Make sure, when I reiterate this, make sure you're choosing a particular context. You can't just, you can try doing this with life overall, but we're too complicated, too complex, and each context brings its own reality, to it. So it's really hard to determine these things overall as a person. You're just going to be different in different places, and that's normal. So yeah, have fun with this. Use it, always, anytime you're doing an NLP technique, especially for the first time, or an NLP process, be playful with it, have fun with it, explore. It's not about trying to get it right. I think that's the biggest problem that people have whenever they try to practice NLP techniques and processes and they get frustrated, is they're trying to get it right. This is not about getting it right. This is about an exploration and finding out what works best for you. You can think of meta programs as filters, how you filter information in a given context. And so what you're doing is you're just adjusting that filter in different ways to take in new information that you might have been filtering out. And maybe you were filtering it out for good reason, that it doesn't help, it's not useful. But at least you know that now. Or maybe you were missing some really good information that changes everything. So now now you can incorporate that and then perform better, or at least optimize that area of your life.